The office was quiet except for the soft sound of papers being moved across the table. Outside, the busy streets of Johannesburg carried on like any other day, but inside that small conference room, 31-year-old Lethabo Makona felt as if time had stopped. Only a week had passed since his father had been laid to rest. He wasn't expecting a fortune or some life-changing surprise. He had come to the reading of the will for one reason only. He wanted closure. No matter what had happened between them over the years, his father was gone, and Lethabo hoped this meeting would finally bring some peace. Around the table sat his stepmother, Namsa Dlamini, her 2 children, several relatives, and the family lawyer. Namsa looked unusually calm. She wasn't grieving. In fact, she almost looked excited. She sat with her arms folded and a small smile on her face, as if she already knew exactly how everything would end. Lethabo noticed it immediately, but he tried not to think too much about it. The lawyer opened a thick file and began reading the document. For a few minutes, everything sounded normal. Then came the words that completely changed the room. The entire estate, including the family home, investment accounts, business shares, and all remaining assets, is left to Mrs. Namsa Dlamini and her 2 children. Lethabo froze. He looked up slowly, certain he had heard it wrong. His name had not been mentioned even once. Not a single property, not a single personal item, nothing. Before he could speak, Namsa leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile. She glanced at him for only a second, but it was enough. That look said everything. It was the look of someone who believed she had finally won. "I suppose your father made his choice," she said softly, unable to hide the smile in her voice. The room became uncomfortable. Some relatives avoided looking at Lethabo, while others exchanged nervous glances. Nobody knew what to say. Lethabo felt a lump in his throat. His father had made many mistakes, but this didn't feel right. Even after everything they had been through, he couldn't believe his father would leave him with absolutely nothing. Still, there seemed to be no point arguing. If that was truly his father's final wish, what could he do? He slowly stood up, picked up his jacket, and prepared to leave. Every step toward the door felt heavier than the last. He wasn't thinking about money anymore. He was thinking about what it meant. Had his father really erased him from the family with a single signature? Just as his hand reached for the door handle, the family lawyer spoke in a calm voice. "Mr. Makona, please don't leave yet." Lethabo turned around. The lawyer looked directly at him before quietly adding, "We're not finished yet." The room fell completely silent. Namsa's confident smile disappeared for the first time that morning. As everyone sat in silence, memories began rushing through Lethabo's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about how everything had changed after his mother's death. He was only 10 years old when he lost her. It was the hardest time of his life. His father tried to stay strong, but the house never felt the same again. A few years later, his father married Namsa Dlamini, hoping the family could have a fresh start. At first, Lethabo believed things would get better. Instead, that was the beginning of years of feeling like he didn't belong In the beginning, Namsa was polite and friendly. She smiled often and told everyone she wanted to be a good stepmother. But little by little, her behavior changed. It wasn't something people outside the family could easily notice. It happened in small ways. She made decisions without asking Lethabo. She planned family outings and somehow forgot to include him. During dinner, most conversations centered around her 2 children while Lethabo quietly ate his meal. He slowly became invisible inside the house. As the years passed, the difference became impossible to ignore. Namsa's children attended expensive private school. They received new phones, laptops, designer clothes, and birthday parties that the whole neighborhood talked about. When they wanted to join sports clubs or travel on school trips, the money was always available. Lethabo's life was very different. After finishing school each day, he worked part-time wherever he could. Sometimes he stocked shelves at a grocery store. Other times he helped at a local cafe or delivered packages on weekends. He used every paycheck to save for university because he knew nobody else was going to pay for it. His father noticed the difference. Many evenings, he would quietly sit beside Lethabo and say, "Son, I know things aren't fair. Just be patient. One day I'll make everything right." Lethabo wanted to believe him. Those words gave him hope. But the promises never turned into action. His father avoided arguments with Namsa and chose peace over confrontation. Every year, the distance inside the family grew a little wider. Even though Lethabo felt alone, he refused to become bitter. He focused on his studies, worked hard, and built his own future. Deep down, However, he never stopped wondering if his father would ever keep the promise he had repeated for so many years. Lethabo slowly sat back down, his heart still racing. The lawyer's words, "We're not finished yet," echoed in his mind. He looked around the room, trying to understand what was happening. A few moments earlier, it had seemed like everything was over. Now, it felt like the story had taken an unexpected turn. For the first time that morning, Lethabo stopped thinking about the inheritance and started paying close attention to the people around him. Namsa looked different now. Before the lawyer spoke, she had been completely relaxed. She smiled with confidence, as if she already knew every word that was going to be written. It didn't feel natural. It almost seemed as though she had practiced this moment in her head many times. But after the lawyer asked everyone to wait, her expression changed. The smile slowly faded. She quickly looked at the lawyer, then at the papers on the table, before forcing another smile. It was a small change, but Lethabo noticed it immediately. The lawyer remained calm. He didn't rush or raise his voice. Instead, he quietly organized the documents in front of him, carefully looking at each page before asking his assistant to bring in another file from a locked cabinet. The request surprised everyone in the room. Namsa spoke up almost at once. "Why do we need more documents?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "The will has already been read." The lawyer looked at her for a moment before replying. "There are a few matters that need to be confirmed before today's meeting can officially end." Nobody said another word. Lethabo's mind began replaying the last few months of his father's life. His father had been seriously ill. As his health got worse, he spent more time at home and depended on other people for almost everything. Visitors became fewer, phone calls became shorter, and Namsa was usually the one speaking on his behalf. Looking back, Lethabo realized there were many times he had tried to visit, but was told his father was too tired or asleep. At the time, he believed those explanations. Now he wasn't so sure. A question he had never asked before suddenly entered his mind. What if this wasn't really his father's final decision? What if someone had taken advantage of his illness when he was at his weakest? Lethabo didn't have any proof yet. He wasn't ready to accuse anyone, but something inside him told him this story wasn't over. And judging by the serious look on the lawyer's face, he wasn't the only person in the room who felt that way. After the meeting finally ended, everyone slowly walked out of the office. Namsa left with a confident smile, talking happily with her two children as if everything had already been settled. She didn't even look back at Lethabo. To her, the matter was over. Lethabo was about to leave as well when the lawyer quietly called his name. "Mr. Makona, could you stay for a few minutes? I'd like to speak with you privately." Lethabo nodded and waited until everyone else had gone. The lawyer closed the office door and invited him to sit down. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the lawyer placed a thick folder on the desk. "I didn't want to discuss this in front of everyone," he said calmly. "There are some things that don't make sense." Lethabo looked at the folder, confused. The lawyer opened it and carefully spread several documents across the table. There wasn't just one will. There were older versions, each signed at different times over the years. In every one of them, Lethabo had been included as one of the main beneficiaries. Some even contained personal messages written by his father in his own handwriting, explaining that he wanted all of his children to be treated fairly. "There is more," the lawyer said as he pulled out another file. Inside were printed emails, trust documents, and handwritten notes. Some emails showed conversations about updating the estate, while others raised questions about changes that had been made only weeks before Lethabo's father passed away. The lawyer pointed to one particular document. "This version is very different from the earlier ones," he explained. "It suddenly removes your name almost completely." Lethabo stared at the paper without saying a word. "What worries me," the lawyer continued, "is how quickly all of this happened. Your father had been seriously ill at the time. Several important documents were prepared and signed within a very short period. That isn't always unusual, but in this case, the timeline raises questions." He showed Lethabo another page containing signature records and dates. Some details don't match. A few signatures look different, and some paperwork seems to have been rushed much faster than normal. Lethabo felt his heart beating faster. "So, you're saying this may not be my father's real final wishes?" he asked quietly. The lawyer leaned back in his chair before answering. "I'm saying I can't ignore these differences. Before anyone receives this estate, I need to know exactly what happened." For the first time since his father's funeral, Lethabo felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. If these documents were telling the truth, then his father might never have abandoned him at all. Someone, somewhere, had been trying to rewrite the story, and now the truth was slowly beginning to come to light. Over the next few weeks, Lethibo kept everything quiet. He didn't argue with Namsa or try to defend himself in front of relatives. Many people believed the case was already over, but he knew the lawyer was still searching for answers. Instead of reacting with anger, Lethibo decided to let the facts speak for themselves. The lawyer began working with people who had known Lethibo's father for many years. One of them was his longtime accountant, who had managed the family's finances for nearly 2 decades. As soon as he reviewed the recent paperwork, he noticed that several transactions looked unusual. "There are changes here that your father never discussed with," the accountant said. That was not like him. They also met with bank officials who carefully reviewed account records and important financial documents. Every signature was compared with older signatures that Lethibo's father had written over the years. Some matched perfectly, but others looked different enough to raise more questions. The investigation didn't stop there. The lawyer also checked records connected to family properties in Pretoria and Cape Town. They looked at ownership papers, transfer documents, and dates when changes had been made. The more they searched, the more strange details they found. One property had been transferred unusually quickly. Another document contained information that didn't match earlier records. In one file, the dates didn't even follow the normal legal process. None of these problems proved fraud by themselves, but together they painted a picture that was becoming harder to ignore. Lethibo stayed calm through it all. Every time another inconsistency appeared, he wanted to confront Namsa and demand answers. But the lawyer always gave him the same advice. "Be patient," he said. "Strong cases are built with evidence, not emotions." Lethibo listened. He kept working, attended every meeting, and carefully reviewed every new document. Day by day, the stack of evidence on the lawyer's desk grew larger. What had started as one suspicious was turning into something much bigger. Every record, every signature, and every property file uncovered another piece of the puzzle. For the first time, Lethibo believed the truth wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was becoming something that could be proven. While Lethibo and the legal team quietly gathered evidence, Namsa acted as if the estate already belonged to her. She never imagined that anyone would question the will. As far as she was concerned, the matter was finished. She believed she had won, and that confidence began to show in everything she did. Within a few weeks, she started making big changes to the family property. One house was being renovated with expensive furniture and modern finishes. Another property was put up for sale. She even began talking about buying a luxury SUV and taking an overseas holiday with her children. Relatives noticed the sudden lifestyle change. Whenever someone asked about Lethibo, Namsa laughed and shook her head. "He has no legal rights anymore," she would say confidently. "The will is clear. Everything belongs to me and my children." Some relatives believed her. Others stayed quiet because they didn't want to get involved. A few even stopped calling Lethibo because they assumed there was nothing he could do. But what Namsa didn't know was that every decision she made was leaving behind a trail of evidence. The lawyer asked the court to temporarily monitor major financial activities connected to the estate while the investigation continued. Property listings, bank transactions, renovation invoices, and sales agreements were all carefully recorded. Nothing was ignored. Every time Namsa signed another document or moved money from an estate account, the legal team added another file to the growing case. The accountant also kept finding new problems. Some payments were made before ownership had been fully confirmed. A few family assets were advertised for sale, even though their legal status was still under review. The lawyer smiled quietly as another report landed on his desk. "She's moving far too quickly," he said, "and every move is creating another record." Lethibo never celebrated or mocked Namsa. He simply watched from a distance and trusted the process. He knew that arguing with her would achieve nothing. The documents were speaking much louder than any words ever could. Namsa thought her confidence made her look powerful. In reality, it was becoming her biggest mistake. Without realizing it, she was helping build the very case that could destroy everything she believed she had already won. Every expensive purchase, every property decision, and every careless statement brought the truth one step closer to the courtroom. The morning of the first court hearing finally arrived. The courtroom was filled with lawyers, relatives, reporters, and people who had heard about the family dispute. Everyone wanted to know how the case would end. As Lethabo walked inside with his lawyer, he felt nervous, but he reminded himself why he was there. He wasn't fighting for money. He was fighting for the truth. A few minutes later, Namsa entered the courtroom with a confident smile. She greeted several relatives as if she had already won the case. She even laughed with her children while waiting for the hearing to begin. Looking across the room at Lethabo, she gave him the same confident look she had worn during the will read. When the judge entered, the courtroom became silent. Namsa's lawyer stood first and argued that the latest will was valid and that there was no reason to delay the transfer of the estate. He claimed everything had been done legally and asked the court to dismiss Lethabo's challenge. Then it was Lethabo's lawyer's turn. Without saying much, he walked to the front of the courtroom carrying several large folders. He placed them on the table one by one. Then he handed the judge a sealed envelope that had not been discussed before. The room immediately became quiet. This evidence was recently verified, the lawyer said. We believe it changes the entire case. He carefully presented older versions of the will, handwritten notes, trust documents, financial records, and signed witness statement. Each document told part of the story. Together, they showed that Lethabo's father had repeatedly expressed the wish for all of his children to be treated fairly. Then came the biggest surprise. The lawyer asked permission to play a recorded meeting that had taken place only a few months before Lethabo's father's death. The judge agreed. As the recording played, the courtroom listened in complete silence. Lethabo's father's voice could clearly be heard talking about protecting his family and making sure Lethabo was never left out of his estate. His words were calm, clear, and impossible to misunderstand. The judge raised his eyes from the documents and paused for several long seconds. Even Namsa's smile disappeared. For the first time since the case began, it was clear that the story everyone had believed was beginning to fall apart. The courtroom no longer felt like a simple inheritance dispute. It had become a search for the truth, and the hidden evidence was finally bringing that truth into the open. After the recording ended, the courtroom remained silent for a few moments. Then the judge called the first witness. One by one, people who had known Lethabo's father for many years walked to the witness stand. None of them seemed interested in taking sides. They simply wanted to tell the truth about what they had seen. The first witness was a former housekeeper who had worked for the family for almost 15 years. She explained that after Lethabo's father became seriously ill, things inside the house changed. According to her, Namsa began controlling almost everything. She decided who could visit, answered most of his phone calls, and often told people he was too tired to see them. I saw Lethabo come to visit more than once, she told the court. Many times, he was told to go home without seeing his father. Next came a neighbor who had lived across the street for years. He said Lethabo's father used to enjoy sitting outside and talking with friends, but during his final months, he was rarely seen. Visitors became fewer and fewer, and anyone who came to the house was usually stopped by Namsa before reaching him. Then one of Lethabo's father's closest business partners gave his testimony. He had worked with him for more than 20 years and knew him better than almost anyone outside the family. He looked directly at the judge and said, "The man I knew would never leave his son with me." He talked about Lethabo with pride. He always wanted him to have a secure future. The lawyer then presented emails and meeting notes that matched the witness statements. Piece by piece, every story supported the next one. Different people from different parts of Lethabo's father's life described the same pattern. They spoke about isolation, pressure, and decisions being made while he was weak and dependent on others. As the testimonies continued, Namsa's confident image began to fall apart. She no longer smiled or looked relaxed. She whispered constantly to her lawyer, but the growing pile of evidence was becoming impossible to explain away. By the end of the day, the courtroom felt completely different from when the hearing had started. The truth was no longer hidden behind paperwork or confident work. It was being confirmed by people who had seen it with their own eyes, and with every new witness, Lethabo's father's real story became clearer than ever before. Several days later, the courtroom was full once again as everyone gathered to hear the judge's final decision. The atmosphere was completely different from the first hearing. This time, nobody looked confident. Even Namsa sat quietly, avoiding eye contact with the people around her. Lethabo remained calm. He had spent months waiting for this moment, but he knew the decision was now in the judge's hands. The judge carefully reviewed the evidence one last time before speaking. He explained that the court had examined every document every witness statement, and every financial record. The older wills, handwritten notes, recorded meeting, and testimony from people who had known Lethabo's father all pointed to the same conclusion. The evidence clearly shows that the disputed documents cannot be accepted as the true wishes of the deceased, the judge said. The courtroom became completely silent. The judge officially declared the altered documents invalid. He ordered that the earlier estate plan, the one that reflected Lethabo's father's real intentions, would be restored. The inheritance would now be shared according to that legitimate plan. Lethabo closed his eyes for a moment as the words sank in. He didn't smile or celebrate. Instead, he quietly took a deep breath. After everything that had happened, the greatest feeling was not happiness. It was relief. The judge then turned to the issue of Namsa's actions. Because the investigation had uncovered evidence of misleading documents and improper handling of estate assets, the court ordered that further legal action be taken again. She would also have to account for the money she had spent and the property decisions she had made while the case was still under investigation. For the first time since the case began, Namsa had nothing to say. The confidence that had once filled every room was gone. As people slowly left the courtroom, several relatives walked over to Lethabo. Some apologized for believing he had been lying. Others admitted they should have supported him from the beginning. Lethabo accepted their kind words, but he wasn't thinking about the money or the property. He was thinking about his father. For months, he had carried the painful belief that his own father had chosen to erase him from the family. Now he finally knew the truth. His father had never abandoned him. Someone had tried to rewrite his father's final wishes, but in the end, the truth proved stronger than lies. That victory meant far more to Lethabo than any inheritance ever could. Several months after the court case ended, Lethabo's life became much quieter. The reporters stopped calling, the courtrooms were behind him, and the family arguments slowly faded away. Instead of focusing on everything he had gained, he started thinking about how he could use his father's inheritance to help others. He remembered his own journey. There had been many nights when he worked after school just to save enough money for university. He knew what it felt like to have big dreams but very few opportunities. That memory inspired him to create something meaningful. Using part of his inheritance, Lethabo started a scholarship fund for hardworking students from disadvantaged families across Durban and nearby communities. Every year, the fund helped young people pay for university fees, books, and other education costs. For many students, it was the chance they had been waiting for. Whenever people asked Lethabo about the long legal battle, he gave the same answer. My greatest victory wasn't winning the inheritance, he said. It was protecting my father's true wishes. In the end, the money was never the most important part of the story. His father's name was cleared, and the truth could no longer be hidden. As for Namsa, the woman who had tried to erase Lethabo from the family, she ended up teaching everyone an unexpected lesson. Her actions reminded people that lies may succeed for a while, but they rarely last forever. Truth takes time, patience requires strength, and integrity is not always rewarded immediately. But in the end, those are the things that leave the strongest legacy. And that was the legacy Lethabo chose to carry forward for the rest of his life.